Hi, you obviously probably know me. I'm Matt. I'll be helping us go through these challenges through the book, the Zingaro book. Uh, I will continue to do these as long as they are helpful. I will stop, obviously, if they are not. But just wanting to explain things how a person who programs in Python might think through things that I think might be helpful for what we are doing. Um, just talking to some of you, um, that there are some things I do want you to be able to see and work through. I'm going to start with the assumption that you have already installed Python and possibly downloaded a coding environment like Visual Studio Code. Another good one that can be really useful is PyCharm. PyCharm Community Edition is completely free. There's obviously paid versions as well, but I obviously have it. I sometimes use it as well. Both of these have their own merits. I think that all of you will enjoy the Visual Studio Code the best, but that's up to you. So starting from there, assuming yes, indeed, you do have Python, especially if you've installed Visual Studio Code and you have clicked and installed the Python, notice I've typed that in right here, we can get started doing basic things. So there are a number of ways you can run your Python programs, either within the terminal. If this has not shown up on your screen, such as you've just started a window, you can go up to Terminal and click New Window here. Um, and I would like to also start by opening a Explorer window by opening a folder. Now for me, I have created a folder DIY coding bootcamp here so that I'll put all my files in here. This can be great because you can see literally all the files that we will be constructing here in this folder update, and I'll be able to add files just by clicking this button. Cool. Um, One of the other things that you might be running it in not only is within the terminal here, you might prefer one of the other terminals. So I sometimes will run things in Anaconda Prompt with its own type of terminal. I have Anaconda, which is a data science extension for virtual machines. You may or may not want it eventually. That's fine. Another thing that could be really useful is this Windows PowerShell. Excuse me. In here, in or if you are on a Mac machine, which I think most of you have, it's just called Terminal. Just look up and search it up. When you run Python, just like this, whether you write in Python 3, let me notice for me, these are identical. Other people, it might not, depending on what you installed. I am, oh, they're not actually identical. Python 3 actually is a newer version, slightly. Yes, I looks like I updated it a little bit later. Cool. Didn't realize I did that. Cool. When you run this, you'll notice there's a slightly different symbol that starts showing up. Um, these three arrows right here represent the fact that I am running Python right now. And I can do all sorts of different things like importing Python modules and something like that. That would probably because let me move right here. Yeah. So when I want to exit, I can literally write the exit function, or I can do Control Z for a um, PC kind of guy. Now, if you are running this in a Mac versus my Windows, this might not be a greater than symbol here. It might be a dollar sign. It's going to be different on what machines you have. You'll notice in the book that they're referring to various different things. That symbol is usually the last thing in your here. So right now I am looking at an extension in my user of math for Matthew. Cool. But I could also very well, uh, whoa, what happened? Ha, that's funny. I cleared the console and it didn't want to. Okay. but you'll notice that right here, that I've now started Python up, and I can do the exact same thing. See? Cool. So let's start doing stuff. So this book, the Zingaro book, tends to be focused on solving problems. So they'll say, this is the challenge we want to do, and this is how, and then it'll talk you through all the technical stuff of what you might need to do. As we've discussed, probably, depending on who, if you've talked to me. Um, there are a couple areas that are missing from your basic curriculum in Python development, which we will talk to. We have another Python crash course book that we'll do after this, but let's focus on those challenges first. So you'll notice on the screen that I have right here that I've kind of written everything out just so that as I'm coding, I know what's kind of generally going on. So we know that for the first challenge, we're going to count the number of words provided, where a word is any sequence of lowercase letters. Now, let's ignore this for a half second because this is something I put in a little bit later. We will, according to, you'll see in the front of this, we'll have something that's coming in from the user. We're going to process that input, and then we're going to output it. That's pretty normal, whether we have functions, whether we have scripts. We're going to get something, we're going to do something with it, we're going to output it. Basic three things. So we also know that the input is going to take the form of a line of text, just one, consisting of lowercase letters and spaces, as mentioned right here. As extra information, we're told that there's exactly one space between each pair of words, no double spacing, and there are no spaces before the first or after the last. The last characteristic is that there's only 80 characters. This is important because if we had longer text going on, there are different limitations we might have on our functions, our calculations, and like. The output itself is a number. Notice I'm phrasing a little bit differently than the book here, but I'm focusing on that it is a number first, and that number is the count of the words in that input line. Cool. So, as mentioned, um, our input is going to be a line of text. In Python, that's typically called a string. Now, a string is a data type or a data structure, a type that allows us to understand what's going on and do stuff with. There's a basic set of basic types like strings, integers, floats, and other different types of things. Now, you'll see this something like this. These are represented with double or single quotes. Um, you can do whatever you want. Sometimes it'll be easier to do one versus another. So notice if I want to input one of the types within my text, it's useful to use the other to surround it. Because notice if I remove the double quotes at the end, we have a break because now we have similar, it doesn't sure what to do. You can get around this by using an escape character, like so. Um, this slash tells the Python interpreter that you are not you're not ending the string. You're doing that. You can do it with a number of other characters later that we might do as well. Actually, let me keep inside this terminal a little bit longer. So there, not only is this basic type, you can do a variety of different things with different operators. And we'll talk about functions next. If you want to concatenate, which is a fancy way of saying add, I'm going to use two different words. Notice I'm using quotes for double quotes for one and single for the other. You can add or concatenate strings by just using the add symbol. Just like you can add, you can also multiply. But what does it mean to multiply strings? means repeating them. Hello, 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 right? I'll let you go through the concept check yourself. Now, with each one of our data types, or maybe described as classes later on, um, these have associated functions that go with it. So, notice this, why I might like this. You'll notice that in this string, Visual Studio Code highlights it in green in my preferred uh, color scheme. Your scheme might be a little bit differently than mine. You'll notice it's a different color than what is known as a method. Now, a method is an operation or function that follows the class, follows the information. So in this case, I have a string hello, and I want to do something to it. In this case, the hello.upper, the upper method, it doesn't know what to do here. The upper method will turn all lowercase into uppercase and leave uppercase alone. There's various other different types of method as well. You'll see in the book that it mentions strip, count, and various other things. You can find them by putting the dot. It's saying from that inherit various different functions. And so we can see various different types. Starts with replace, join, encode. So notice it will give you type hints, which are great. So it's going to count something, something that is a string. We might have extra things we might want to add to it, and it's going to output, notice that arrow, an integer. So in this case, this tells you when to start and end in a string or whatever. Count the number of overlapping occurrences on this. So in this case, let's go back down here. Instead of upper, let's do count. Let's count the number of L's, shall we? Now we know that there are two, and so does Python. If I ask how many A's are in there obviously aren't in any A's. Let's go back to here. Um, let's say, what am I doing here? The way that Python counts things is starts with 0, which is kind of weird, but that's how a lot of coding languages do. So if you remember when I was doing here, it says the first argument, the first variable that we can plug into this function is a string. Put a comma, and the next one is the start. Where do I want to start? So in this case, what I asked this function to do, and we'll go more into this when we get to functions, is start from the third position. So 0, 1, 2, 3. That's that second L. How many L's starting and looking at LO? Well, obviously there's only one. So that's what's the difference between these two. But you can kind of imagine that there's this rich choice that we can build into a lot of these basic variable types. We can build more, and we will towards the end of our Python journey, but there's a lot of different things that we can do with these different types of methods. So we have strings. Cool. Well, how can you deal with numbers? Well, there's two broad chunks of different types of numbers. We have ints and we have floats. Ints or integers are whole numbers that you learned in class growing up. So no 3.2s. That would be what's known as a float or a decimal. These are different. Ints can be very powerful. Floats can be very powerful. It's a way to keep track of what might be going on. And then these things do the very same thing. Now, negative numbers also count here within our different types of int. Notice that this will function differently from here. Negative 9 is a int. A negative 9.0 is a float. If I divide two ints together, I end up getting a float. If I try to cast or turn a float into an int, notice I'll lose the decimal point. Notice it isn't rounding down. it's losing the decimal point. Because if I round it down, negative 1.5, it should have been negative 2. But we can do all the same sorts of things. So 3 times 5 is 15. 3 divided by 5.6. Where it starts getting interesting is what happens if I only want the whole part. So remember we had 3 halves. That is a float. What happens if I did just want the integer part? I could use the int, but I can also do, white spaces don't do terribly much in Python, so feel free to use them. This command right here gives us the integer part, the whole part of the division, the dividend. What happens if I want the remainder? I can use what in math what's known as a modulo, or the modulo operator. So if I divide 3 by 2, I get 1 with a remainder of 1. Let's say I divide 12 by 5. Well, it can go 12 can go into 5 too with a remainder of 2. And you can double check that I'm not doing it something weird, but that's just adding 1. So this would be go into it 2 times with a remainder of 3. So these are various powers. Well, we've done division. Let's do exponents to do the other side. And this is where it gets kind of funny. Our natural inclination would be to do this. Now, 1 squared, we all know, 1 times 1 is 1. But when I do 1 caret 2, I don't get 1. I get 3. That's because this caret symbol is not the exponent that you're used to. If you want to use exponents, you multiply. The caret is known as the XOR or XOR command, and it's useful for binary and other various different things. It's very cool, very useful, but it's not exponentiation. Keep that in mind. So we've dealt with numbers, we've dealt with text, but in order to do stuff, a lot of times we want to design a variable to hold information while we do stuff in it. Because remember, we are inputting from the user, we're processing the input, and then we're outputting it. So we're not immediately going through everything. So in order to do with that, we might need to hold some information, right? So your book goes through and mentions, let's hold the dollars. So let's say we have $250. Well, from there, we can do a variety of different things. We can, notice it's holding on, it's recognizing that it's an integer. We can add to it, right? We can subtract from it. We can define new amounts. We can call a new variable, say $2, right? So let's play with this, right? Now, does this mean that dollars has changed? No. The equal sign is the assignment operator. So notice that even though I did dollars plus 10, it didn't actually change that number. So likewise, I can say dollars divided by 5. Notice, remember I said earlier, dividing creates a float. So even though 5 goes into 250 and even 50 times, it gives me a float because that's what it is. Now, if I do the integer division, I will get an even 50, but you need to decide what you want to do. Well, we can assign numbers to variables, but so we can also, as your book shows, describe text and assign it to text. This can be useful, as your book shows, if we want to hold on to that text and then put it together. So in this case, let us so notice in this concatenation, I start with Monday, I end with Friday, and I put the minus or hyphen symbol in between them to create this. There's no spaces there, so that's why there's no spaces Even though this white space is here, it isn't a part of the string, and that's why it doesn't give us any spaces automatically. Now, I've mentioned that just doing stuff, acting with those variables doesn't change it. So what happens if I do want to change it? That's fine. Notice it's acting exactly the same way. We have to reassign it to something else. Similarly, we can use itself to reassign. A shorthand to this, if I'm taking my same symbol and I'm adding, subtracting, doing something to it, take that operand and put it in front of the equal sign, and it'll do the same thing. In this case, I'm going to divide it by 2. So what do you think? 250 divided by 2 is 125, so this should be 126. Bingo. But notice, because it was a single, it becomes a float. So, bully for us. These are all great texts, but doesn't actually solve our problem. So what can we do? Okay. Well, we get one line of text. So let's literally call it line. A function that can be useful to get from the command line or command prompt is literally input. You'll notice that this is a function because of the color. In my case, the color schema that I have, it tends to be a yellow. Let's take this out because it's not actually what I want. Okay, so from what we've learned, we've that's the one thing I need to give you, but everything else we actually kind of already know. Well, we want to know the total number of words. Well, from the line, what do we have? Well, we've learned the count command. And they put a lot of information into counting spaces. Notice they keep mentioning spaces up there. And that's our key hint that could be used to solve this. So if I have something like hello world, we know that there are 2 words here. But the count command's only going to count that one space. So it's only going to give us 1. It's 1 less than we want. So an easy way to solve this, let's try to keep it simple, is just to add 1. So let's check to see if it would work. Okay, hello world, my name is Matt. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces. Plus 1 would be 6. And that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, we're there. Cool. So we have inputted, we have processed, but we haven't outputted the results. A nice function that could be useful to deal with that is the print command. The print command takes something and will output it directly into the command line prompt. So, cool. In here, I have this right here. So I want to run this program. I want to see if it works. Cool. One way to do that is to write Python, the operation you're going to do, and then the text, the actual function, the script that you want to run. In this case, I want to run word count. And notice right there, it's not seeming to do anything because remember, it's asking us to input stuff. Remember, hello world, my name is Matt. We already said that this should give us 6. That's indeed what it is. Cool. That's great. Here's the problem. The only thing I would disagree with what the official word might actually be, is what happens if you forgot what you did? Well, it can be sometimes useful to tell your user what's going to happen. Please enter some text so we can count the number of words. Resave, and let's run it again. Notice this time it helps guide me towards what I might want to do. Changed absolutely nothing. So got the same thing, but it might be easier for me to actually utilize. So just because it is simpler to maybe not put something, it might be worthwhile to do that, to include other little bits and go over and above in certain areas. Do pay attention that we do have access to that code analyzer that the book sends you links to, that notice that it did print this information as well as the total number of words. So if the code analyzer is expecting only a single prompt inside the text editor, that could be confusing for it. Do be aware. So in this case, if I wanted to then remove that, I could put just simply a hashtag or yeah, put the number symbol in front. And that just turns it into a comment. And the program is therefore told ignore it. And it'll work. Cool. Hope this is helpful. I'm going to do a couple more of these tonight. And have a great day.